There are plenty of things which can make a story great. A strong start, a cast of likable characters, a compelling plot, or an immersive world setting with a deep history and lore. However, there are also a lot of mistakes which can ruin your story too. What if we are good writers who just make a couple of small mistakes along the way? What if we have what it takes to make something which resonates with people, we squander all of it for the sake of our own egos? What happens when the mistakes we make are not made in the writing itself, but in everything we do outside of writing? Many might say that the mistake every failed artist has is one stemming from their own ego. However, I would posit that the ego is necessary to create something fantastic. In order to be successful artists, we must hold two contradictory mindsets in our heads at all times. The first is that we are the greatest artist who has ever lived. Someone with incredible skill and even greater potential who knows what they're doing. The second is that we are brazen dumbasses who couldn't make our way out of a paper bag, much less the corner we've written ourselves into for the 40th time in a row. Yes, sometimes things which look like mistakes on the surface might only be mistakes if we lack the knowledge of how to utilize them effectively. Writing and art is inseparable from who we are as people, and so I say we must look inward and we must look into the reflection our art gives to us. A lot of the time, when we look at videos like this as a guide to get better at writing, we often don't think of the things outside of writing which we are doing poorly. Our time management, our eating habits, the time we dedicate to boredom, and most importantly, our sleep. And that's why I've partnered with today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Guys, I gotta say, when I was approached by Manta Sleep for this, I was a bit skeptical at first. I thought that sleep masks weren't really all that useful, and waking up tired was just a thing that's meant to happen as you grow older. When I say that this sleep mask worked instantly for me, and I became a fan overnight, I quite literally mean it. This is one of those products that simply works, and it works well. And they're willing to help you get better sleep with the code on screen to get 10% off. This sleep mask is an investment, not just in your own comfort, but also in your quality of life while you're awake. You won't know just how tired you were until you wake up feeling refreshed. Head on over to the link in the description and use my discount code to get 10% off at checkout. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. As I said before, much of the writing and art we make is entwined with who we are as people, our experience, our strength, and our flaws. And while I also believe that art can stand separate from its creator, I also feel it is impossible to separate art from the artist when creating it. Many of us would like to believe that if we watch enough videos telling us how to properly use a semicolon in a sentence, that it will somehow make us more prepared to write a good story than ever before. Somehow it will inspire more ideas in us, and we finally step away as bystanders and step back as creators. That's why the first mistake you should avoid as a writer is academic procrastination. In other words, one of the biggest mistakes we can make as writers is conflating research and outlining with progress on our written work. Many times, writers will create the illusion of productivity in order to silence that voice of guilt in their heads, telling them that they should actually try writing a few scenes in their stories instead of compiling another series of lore documents which will never be covered in the actual story. This coincides with another issue I've listed in a previous video, which is world builder's disease. Basically, you can spend so much time world building that you've failed to actually write any sort of story or characters at all. Academic procrastination entwines itself with perfectionism as well. Often it is that final leap towards a finished product we fear more than delaying and researching. We will second guess ourselves. Heck, sometimes we might even want to rewrite everything that we've written so far. But that's why I need you to avoid the next mistake on my list, which is for you to avoid rewriting your draft unless you have completed it. If your story does not have an ending, then do not go back to edit your draft until it does. We might think that it's actually improving our story to add in new ideas as we think of them, or to make things from previous chapters more consistent with the ideas that sprang to our heads during the writing of later chapters. I'm here to tell you from experience that this will make your writing journey so much longer than it needs to be, and a lot more difficult. In fact, whenever someone pays for me to critique their writing, join my memberships by the way, this is often the advice I will give the most to people. Now, obviously, you don't need to finish your story draft in order to get some critique on it. However, you do need to finish your story draft before you even think about implementing most of those critiques. But you might be screaming at your monitor thinking that what I've just espoused is actually terrible advice and harmful to whoever might take it. And I'm here to say that it is, unless you do the one thing that I'm about to tell you. And what is that one thing, you might ask? Well, it's got a little something to do with avoiding the next mistake on this list, which is to avoid letting your ideas evaporate. In other words, whenever you have an idea, write it the fuck down. Don't just write it down either. Make it well organized so that you can find it later. Put it in a place you know that you're able to track it down. Most of all, avoid writing it in a place that you will never check or use ever again. Get a dedicated place to store your ideas and make sure you do your due diligence to title and catalog those ideas for later. Whether that's using the comment function on something like Google Docs to jot down some ideas for how to edit that specific chapter, or buying a physical notebook where you can scribble down every idea that you have when you have it, you need to avoid letting these ideas disappear into the ether. Nothing is more frustrating than having a eureka moment for how to improve your story and then forgetting all about it by the time you go to write it. So, while you're making your rough draft, it's important to push through until the draft is fully completed. And, along the way, you should always keep notes of your new ideas as they come to you. You should jot down the chapter at which you want to maybe implement that idea, and any of the chapters that you've written which might need to be changed in the next draft. You should also make sure to keep track of that. Be specific, be organized, and be thorough for your future self. Spending just a little bit of time making things accurate and well organized will save you years of drafting and redrafting the same dogshit confusing story you've been trying to salvage for the last 5 years. Which brings me to my next mistake to avoid, and that's to avoid zombifying your darlings. The term kill your darlings is often advice given to writers because an idea in their story is getting in the way of a cohesive and engaging narrative. For most new writers, this takes the form of a secret or a mystery which the author has intentionally left out because they are married to the idea that it will be a big reveal. Unfortunately, most new writers will fall into the trap of hiding their most compelling ideas behind a confusing wall of hemming and hawing, or obscuring the idea for no reason whatsoever. In fact, I've seen so many stories where the first few chapters follow a character who's doing something for seemingly no reason or motivation at all, always avoiding telling the audience the necessary information about who this character is and why they're doing what they are doing. Only to, about 5 or 10 chapters in, finally reveal who they are, what they do, and why they do it. And for that explanation to not really be a huge reveal or revelation, but instead a, well, why the fuck didn't you tell me earlier? What's important here is that the audience should always have a basic understanding of the character's motivations as well as the direction the plot is going. If you don't have those two things, then avoid zombifying your darlings and just tell us what those points are already. Another example of zombifying your darlings is when a certain point of world building or a certain image of a character is always seeming to take away from the rest of the story. Here's an example. Blitz and Stolas' romance from Hell of a Boss. To preface this point, when I talk about Hell of a Boss, I actually talk about it from the perspective of someone who enjoys the show with all of its flaws. I think much of the critique stems from a place of annoyance with the show's popularity as well as the attitude of its creator, VivziePop. More on that later. But to be in Hell of a Boss's corner here, as well as Has-Been Hotel's corner, I'd say that the show is still above average and overall pretty good. Maybe in the same way that JJK is above average and overall pretty good. What I'm trying to get at is that these two shows do a lot of things very right, but they also do a few very key things wrong. And it's because of that seemingly wasted potential that people are often more critical of the show than they otherwise would be. It's because the writing was competent enough to get us to care so much for it that we get so mad when it fails or falls short of our expectations. To bring it back to my point, Hell of a Boss's zombified darling is the relationship between Stolas and Blitz. What was at first a comedic, compelling, and dark dynamic of quid pro quo soon became the main focus of the show as a whole. It is very much VivziePop mashing her dolls together and making them kiss. And I don't think many people would have a problem with the romance if it wasn't for the initial promise made to the audience. Because the problem with a zombified darling is not that it's a central theme or idea of your story, but more so that it detracts from the central themes and ideas of our story. Hell of a Boss promised us an episodic show of devilish hitmen with their wacky hijinks on Earth. It promised us a bit of a dark relationship dynamic between Blitz and Stolas. It promised flawed, broken characters who've all done something wrong and who all deserve their place in hell in one way or another, but yet who also equally deserve the chance at redemption. When VivziePop got attached to the idea of Stolas and Blitz healing each other, she began to stray away from that original tone. We get introduced to the idea that Stolas and Blitz actually knew each other since they were children. That Stolas was actually justified to cheat on his wife because his wife is a complete fucking bitch. We're reassured that Blitz actually never did anything truly wrong to anyone. He burned his best friend by accident. He never meant to hurt his past lovers and ex-girlfriends, boyfriends, and everything in between. And by the time we take a look around at what this zombified darling has done to our story, we find that it has infected everything else in it to the point of rot and decay. To the point that we can no longer live without our darling. And the show we once knew, the potential we once saw within it, is now dead, but still somehow moving along. But what happens when we as writers are met with this harsh reality? What happens when someone tells it to us in a rude way or in a way that we just don't want to agree with? Well, I think that's where we come to another mistake that you should avoid when writing, and that's responding to dishonest criticisms of your work. If you've made something which has garnered an audience of people, it is important to learn how to manage your relationship with that audience. For me personally, I prefer that my audience separates who I am and their opinion of me from their opinion of the things that I write. However, I have also acknowledged that for some people, an author and what they make is sometimes inseparable. The last thing, though, that I want is for someone to tell me that my writing is good or bad simply because they are trying to impress me or hurt my feelings. I prefer genuine honesty, but I also prefer honesty with some compassion behind it. After all, honesty without compassion is just cruelty, and it's not helpful to anyone. So I can definitely empathize a little bit with people like VivziePop. I can't possibly know what it's like to form a community of people who have nothing but nice things to say about your stories in the beginning. All the fan art, the communities, the positive energy, all the praise and admiration, to the point that you're even deified for having written something so many people enjoy. And then, the inevitable fall. Some more spectacular than others. Some more tragic than others. From the J.K. Rowlings and VivziePops to the Kanye Wests and Davids. David with a 4, by the way. But some of these things can be avoided during your career as an artist, which is why my advice here is to avoid engaging with people who have decided to hate you. The truth is that you're never going to convince them, and if you think, maybe I can dunk on them and my followers will think I'm cool, then you are sorely mistaken. Nobody likes a bully, and your followers are not your friends. They are not your pawns, nor are they your servants. They are with you so long as they enjoy what you're making. They defend you so long as they believe in the things that you write about. And they will abandon you the moment your flaws exceed your talent. So avoid arguments with people who are not there to have an honest discussion. Avoid internet spats with people who tell you that your writing is bad. The more you engage with people who have made up their minds to hate you, the more goodwill you burn with those who are watching it happen as bystanders. There is no winning in that scenario, and there never will be. In fact, that spiteful energy is exactly what you end up revealing and teaching to your audience. You teach them either that you are a spiteful and unworthy person, or that it is okay to be a spiteful person to those who don't enjoy what you've made. My advice is to be kind when you can, and be silent when you can't. Ignore the critics if their advice is not useful to you. Ignore the people who make up random conspiracy theories about you. Ignore the people who have a strongly held belief built upon a foundation of misunderstandings and ignorance. Because even if you convince one person that they're wrong, you've managed to convince many more that you are wrong for talking back. But to push back a little bit on that, are writers just supposed to say nothing when someone slanders something that they've poured their heart and soul into? Are they supposed to sit by and allow groups of haters to form and coalesce? Yes, actually, because you cannot control other people, and attempting to do so will only make that sort of thing stronger in the long term. I mean, the Streisand effect exists for a reason. Focus your energy towards creation over destruction, towards kindness over cruelty, and you will find yourself with a lot less enemies to fight when it comes to the things you make. For me personally, this is actually one of the reasons I never set out to grow this channel very quickly. I see YouTube as a means of acquiring certain skills and resources you can't get anywhere else. One of those skills happens to be dealing with an audience. Because the reason a lot of people end up hating creators like VivziePop, Dream, Pirate Software, and almost anyone else is the rate at which they grow in popularity. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. We see a creator explode with something immensely popular, and there's a period of time, about a year or two, where no one has anything bad at all to say about these people. You look in the comments, and it's nothing but compliments and glazing. Your newfound audience will often stroke your ego and build your legend for you. You will be deified by an audience which has exploded in growth. They will revere you as a god until they realize that you're only human. Then they'll point a finger at you and tell you that it's your fault for not having lived up to the standard that they set for you. Heck, during this period of time, You might even begin to believe the glaze. You might begin to think you're different from other people, that you know better, that you are better. And with that comes a massive, vulnerable ego. You get used to the praise, the admiration, and the affirmation until one day, other people get sick of you. People who are not in your audience, but who can't seem to avoid you or your fan base wherever they go on the internet. All it takes is one blemish on the perfect persona your audience has made for you. One heated argument, one hot take, or flag in the ground on the wrong side of history. And after that, you will be poked and prodded, your ego used against you. It's hard enough to tame that ego on your own with everyone building you up. It's even more difficult when people are constantly attacking it, constantly making you angry, always chastising you for being imperfect, always making bad faith arguments to the point it becomes difficult to separate the good criticisms from the bad ones. People will make videos about you. They will put you in their thumbnails, and audiences will gather for those people siphoning from your popularity. Now, I'm not saying that this is an inherently terrible thing, nor am I saying that we must take some sort of moral high road to prevent it from happening. I'm saying that this is an inevitability if you do not learn how to manage your emotions when interacting with your audience. I think this is the reason why it's so important to grow slowly. You learn the same lessons with an audience of 50,000 as you do with an audience of 50 million. It's just that with the audience of 50 million, the frequency and volume of hatred directed towards you is amplified and near omnipresent. Early on in my YouTube career, I used to reply to every single comment I got, even the ones which were bad faith, mainly because I, as a person, like to argue about media, but also because I enjoyed the attention and wanted to reciprocate it in some way. I still read comments, I still respond or show that I've read comments when I can, but now that this channel has grown to a point where I can't get around to everyone, nor do I really want to, it's exhausting to speak with so many people, and sometimes I worry that I might come off wrong or be provoked in acting or speaking in a way that I don't really want to. I can't imagine what would have happened to me if my channel had hit 10 million in a year, or if I somehow became one of the first indie animations to garner a utterly massive internet following, or for my first novel to become a cultural phenomenon for an entire generation of people, in the case of someone like J.K. Rowling. That's not to excuse anything any of these creators did, by the way. It's just expressing empathy for the one problem they should be allowed to have. Fame is a cruel and fickle mistress, and managing it is the key to maintaining a steady and consistent career as a creative. So avoid defending the things you create. Allow your work to speak for itself. And if people don't understand it or they don't like it, then make sure you acknowledge those opinions as valid, even if you don't agree with them. Nothing is more convincing than confidence, and confidence sometimes means shutting the fuck up. I think it's easy for me to sit here and give this advice to creators far bigger than myself who will probably never see this. I'm honestly just another voice in the masses compared to them, and that's definitely a lot of noise. I'm only hoping that by talking about some of them as examples of mistakes to avoid, that I might be able to siphon some of that popularity for myself by adding them to the thumbnail. The irony isn't lost on me, don't worry. But if I had to say my next mistake for you to avoid, I would say for you to avoid attaching your name and your personal creations to something bigger or more popular than yourself. This happens a lot with drama and commentary channels, but it can also happen with stories and things like video games or even restaurants. If you need some examples of this, think of all the game studios who wanted to create a World of Warcraft killer, or the ones who set out to be a Pokemon killer or a Minecraft killer. There's a disgustingly massive amount of games who have marketed themselves as ones who will overthrow a massive franchise by providing a better experience, only to fall short of their goal simply because, with every breath they speak to advocate for themselves, they're also advertising their competition. I mean, in my lifetime, I saw Quiznos, which was the better sandwich sub restaurant, lose the fight against Subway simply because their advertisements would not shut up about how insecure they were about being better than Subway. When people think of Temtem, they think of Pokemon. When people think of Nickelodeon All-Stars or Multiverses, they think of Smash Brothers. Hytale is Minecraft, Quiznos is Subway, Pepsi is Coke, so on and so forth. As for drama and commentary channels on YouTube, it's oftentimes that their audiences are not really there for their content and their personality or their takes, but rather the drama itself. They want to be informed, and they want to share their opinions or have their beliefs validated and affirmed by the ones speaking in the video. That's why we often see many massive fall-offs in content spaces like that. It's a game of attaching your name to others in order to grow, but to a very, very incredible extreme. When you're constantly reporting and preying on the downfall of others, that will inevitably come back around to you as well, as soon as your name gets big enough for people to care about. When it comes to be your turn, don't be surprised when people realize they were only around because of the people you talked about, and not because you were somebody special to them. Media critique channels can also function like this, which is why I personally try to avoid reviewing shows and stories on this channel. But that brings something else up. If I'm telling you to avoid attaching your name to bigger names than your own, then am I not a hypocrite for doing the same thing? And I would say the key word is attach. It's okay to have inspirations, but you should avoid making it your brand. For me, I purposely don't always talk about popular things, and I try to avoid talking about the same series too often, though I sometimes fail. I also don't try to make any claims that I'm attempting to be the next insert writer or insert YouTuber here. I will never be anybody but myself, and so I will never strive to be another person. My content is my own, even if I might reference other people and stories while making it. There is definitely a fine line to be drawn, though. What's the difference between talking about something and attaching ourselves to the name of something? What's the difference between a popular video with good takes and a video which turns into that guy who makes videos about X thing? I'm sure if I really wanted to, I could create a good digital circus analysis channel, or a great Hell of a Boss review channel, or a commentary channel, or a drama channel. However, such things, I think, would be only temporary in their success. It would make me a derivative of someone who actually is creative. It wouldn't make me a creative. But at the same time, I also want viewership, and it's often very difficult to build an audience from scratch with just your own work. After all, people's time is valuable, so why would they waste it if they didn't think it was either relevant to them or something related to something they might like? Which brings me to my next mistake for you to avoid, and that's to avoid wasting people's time. Now, I know I might be the pot calling the kettle black here. I mean, I often ramble and yap about just whatever comes to my mind. That's sufficient for a YouTube video, though. In fact, the algorithm encourages people to pad out their essays because a longer video means a better chance to perform well in the algorithm. But perhaps that's not sufficient for something that you've written, like a book. For me personally, that's just how I am and how my brain tends to work. Most of these videos are a stream of consciousness without much editing after the fact, where I will often diverge into tangents about whatever thought comes to mind. it's very difficult to condense my thoughts down into something quick and simple. Point is, don't do this in anything but your rough draft or a story that you're writing. I personally think I'm able to tell when a point needs to be moved forward or when it can linger. But everyone has a different threshold of what they would consider to be an acceptable waste of time. You should always condense your thoughts when you go back to edit them down, because some of you might have gotten disinterested in the long tangent I just went on, which is why my advice is to avoid wasting people's time. However, a waste of time is a lot different for something like a YouTube video than it is for something like a book or a TV show. In a YouTube video, a waste of time is something where you can do something else while you listen to it in the background. I think most people come to YouTube because they want to waste time, or they want to have something to listen to while they do other things. However, something like a book, video game, or TV show requires a lot more investment than a podcast or a yapping video essay meant to be left running in the background. And that's why my next mistake for you to avoid is to avoid treating different mediums as though they are the same. We've all been there at one point or another. Reading a book or a comic or a manga, which resonated with us very, very deeply. We hear that it's going to be adapted into a movie or a TV show, and we're ecstatic to see it. Only for that adaptation to fall short in every regard and for disappointment to set in. And sometimes unbridled anger. We think to ourselves, they had such a perfect story. Why couldn't the writers of the adaptation just use that instead? Why did they replace this great story with such a generic one? And there's a lot of reasons as to why this could be the case, but one of them is simply the fact that script writing is a very different beast from book or comic book writing. Heck, even graphic novel adaptations are sometimes unable to fully capture the magic of its written source material. But if you are a writer who wants to adapt your work into multiple mediums, or simply create numerous different stories in different mediums, you would do well to recognize that, while some of them are similar, most of them have key differences which must be navigated in order to make something good. My personal example of a failed adaptation is the Lightning Thief movies. We had such a fantastic setup for these characters, a wonderful escapist Greek fantasy world hidden just beneath the surface of our mundane, everyday lives. Characters with great personality and dialogue, and a compelling narrative ripe for younger audiences to fall in love with. And I was one of them. The Percy Jackson series still stands to this day as one of my favorite book series, and it's for good reason. Even going back to read it now, I can see the personality dripping off of its first-person narrative. We really get a sense of who everyone is in the story, and Riordan does a great job of both making me want to live in the world as a half-blood, but also making me not want to live in that world because of how many terrifying monsters there are, and how exhausting it seems to be a demigod. And then the movie is just, well, it's not very good, is it? They aged up the characters, which shows that whoever was writing the damn thing didn't care to read the series as a whole, since that instantly ruins the prophecy of the entire book series. And why did they do it? Because they thought it'd appeal to wider audiences. But if that's the case, then wouldn't you think that Harry Potter would have made the same decision? These movies came out in the wake of Harry Potter's massive popularity as not only a novel series, but a movie franchise and juggernaut. So why the fuck do we have to make these characters older when it is canonically a story beat that these preteens will grow into adulthood and fulfill a prophecy once they turn 16? I'd be able to ignore that if they didn't also make a bunch of other dumb decisions, such as Annabeth not really being all that smart or tactical as a character, or Grover basically being replaced by a black guy doing his best Chris Tucker impression, Or all the scenes they added to the movie for no actual reason because the writers thought it would be better. Like, why did they add a Hydra scene when they could have had Percy fighting the god of war? Where even is Ares in that movie? What went wrong here? I think it's a case of having to appease investors, personally. Writers aren't always to blame for situations like this, and a lot of times they're doing the best that they can with what they've been given. A lot of the times it's the people who put their money into a movie who end up making these terrible decisions for the story. After all, these changes to characters all seem to be made specifically as a way of garnering a more mainstream audience and therefore selling it to more people. In all actuality, it simply alienates the fans of the novel who came to see it, cynically positing that the fans were already a guarantee, so they might as well risk pissing them off so long as there's a chance that it might garner more attention from other audiences. What we need to avoid doing as writers and as critics is thinking that movies and books are written in the same way. And many people know this on the surface, but I don't think everyone fully understands it. When writing a book, a lot of the time we are by ourselves. Maybe we have an editor who says no to us every now and then, or a publisher who enforces writers to reach their deadlines. Or maybe we have some beta readers who will give us really good critiques and let us know if our books are bad. Either way, that's a lot less pressure and a lot less cooks to spoil the broth than something like a big budget movie. As a scriptwriter, you're often not really all that high up when it comes to determining what happens in the movie or making decisions. Sure, you come up with the backbone, and without you there would not be a movie in the first place, but when it comes to overall decision-making power, a writer really doesn't have much say in production at all, even though they honestly should. Much of script writing is about compromise and working with people to meet them where they are. For example, if you, as a writer, envision a scene happening at a pool or in the ocean or on a beach, the production needs to be able to make that happen. And for the production, it means they need to rent out the beach or the pool, and for the actors, it means they need to constantly be working their asses off in either the blistering hot sun or extremely cold pool water. And not to mention, they're going to have to make multiple takes, and they're going to be filming all day in the water. And in these instances, sometimes it's just better to change where this scene happens, even if your first vision was for it to happen at a beach or a pool. Equally, if you're adapting something from a novel, you could read the entire series and be inspired for a perfect adaptation of the work, only to find that most of the scenes from the book are either extremely difficult to film or very, very costly for the production. And sometimes investors just don't really like the ideas from the book, and they think it'd be more appealing if you find a way to put something else in its place. When a show is pitched to a studio, such as like a cartoon, for example, it will often go through a lot of changes between its pilot and the first fully produced episode. Changes in the art style to make it less costly to animate, for example. The color of a character's hair simply to make them more appealing on a visual sense. Their personalities to appeal to more people or to better fit their test audience's preferences. Sometimes even the premise, plot, and tone will be changed simply to make things more appealing to audiences. And sometimes these changes can actually be good. They can be the critique that we as writers needed in order to elevate our work. So when I say avoid being blinded by your artistic vision, I really do mean it. There is something to be said about an uncompromising artist, one with such a strong vision of their work that almost no one can steer them away from it. There is something admirable and almost praiseworthy about an artist like that. Unless their vision isn't all that great. Many people would probably look to George Lucas as an example of this. We see in the original trilogy that Star Wars is actually an incredible work of fiction, one which is part of the cultural zeitgeist to this day, and which the original trilogy of movies built up so much goodwill that we're still willing to watch whatever slop they feed us. And then we see the prequel trilogy, where no one in production was likely confident enough to tell George Lucas no when creating it. We see all of the half-baked ideas and strange choices that he makes as a writer. The lack of polish, which could have made the trilogy far better than it ended up becoming. But for me, I think I want to talk about someone else who did this. And this isn't any shade to them. But when I watched the video of them talking about the production of their graphic novel, I couldn't help but get a little worried, only to have my fears confirmed when I actually got the novel itself. For those who don't know, last year, Cory Kenshin came out with a graphic novel, as well as an incredibly well-animated advertisement for it. Now, I actually really like Cory, and I wanted this graphic novel to succeed. In fact, I still do. However, I would be lying if I said I thought this graphic novel was good. There's a certain point in Cory's initial advertisement video where he talks about how uncompromising he was with his vision when making the first book. How other people in production attempted to sway him and talk him down from involving certain scenes, and then how he simply shook his head and doubled down. Now, that's a perfectly fine thing to do if you're confident in your vision. Most writers think that if they are uncompromising in their artistic vision, that just means that they're not allowing their art to be tainted by exterior interests, and that what they make will inevitably come out to be everything they dreamt it would be. For me, though, I saw the lack of polish in the story caused by Cory Kenshin's lack of compromise. I saw the many different writing mistakes that were made. The nonsensical world, which was not explained very well, but sometimes they acknowledge that it's not explained very well, just to continue not explaining it so that they can have a reveal later on. Kind of like the mistake I told you to avoid earlier in the video. And then, when they do need to actually tell you what's going on and why it's happening, they end up having to info dump all of that at the worst possible time. And the main character had a good and compelling concept for their motivation, with a pretty grating and annoying personality which didn't at all serve their concept. The main character actually, for me, borders on being a Mary Sue, but only just barely avoiding that label in my eyes. I often felt that much of the world building and characterization could have been done better if it was simply switched to an earlier chapter or covered in a more organic way. And I can't help but wonder what the story might have looked like if Cory had just listened to the other members of his team. I think there's a lot to like about Cory's graphic novel, and in fact, I have every reason to like his story. I want to do what Cory did as well one day. I want my story to have an amazing comic book adaptation which is purchased by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. I want to run it independently and deliver it directly to my viewers. Maybe even commission my own animated series pilot to be made if the graphic novel is successful enough. But at the end of the day, a graphic novel is not the same as a novel. And a show is not the same as either of these things. If you cannot trust the criticism that your team is giving you, then maybe they shouldn't be on your team. Or maybe you should reflect as to why you can't trust their opinion, and try to see where that critique is coming from and how to implement it. Because your team of writers and the people who are working on adapting your work should be trusted in their opinions, and you should compromise with them when they tell you that something is wrong. We all make mistakes, but there are two big mistakes which we should always avoid when writing something. The first mistake is not learning from your failures. And the second mistake is the mistake of not bothering to fail in the first place. So make as many mistakes as you can learn from. Take the risk of being imperfect for the sake of creating something amazing. Open up a document and start writing.